We're also launching a Canadian bourbon on Tariff Day, April 2nd. So that's coming up. It's a cask that we selected from one of our local craft distillers, their oldest cask of bourbon that they've ever launched. So that's going to be kind of fun. And if you haven't tried it, I mean, I know a lot of you are probably waiting for the tasting. I suppose the last thing to quickly mention is that Barry's blended malt is flying off the shelf because it's stunning and it's pretty reasonably priced. So, like, it's comparably old to most of the whiskeys in tonight's lineup and half to almost a third of the price of the other ones we're trying in here. So, for if you're disappointed that you can't purchase a bottle of the Signatory you wanted tonight, you should probably just buy a bottle of the berries. But anyway, I digress. Let's get rolling here. We've got Glen Keith. I'm going to put this up on screen. So what we've got tonight, I think most of you know the drill here. This is the Symington's Choice selections from Signatory, which came out, I think they first came out in 2023. We've had them now for a little over a year. This is our second or our third recurring batch of whiskeys from the Symington's Choice range. And there's some pretty interesting casks in here. I mean, all of them are very small quantities. They're all single casks. We buy them as 2-packs, which is kind of handy. It's been fun to put these into a tasting. They're, for the most part, getting pretty good reviews from the importer or from Whiskey Base and or Whiskey Fun. So we're kind of excited to try them. I've not tried a lot of sherried Glen Keith, so that's going to be a little bit interesting tonight. This is a second fill Oloroso sherry butt Glen Keith from 1996, the year at least 2 people in tonight's tasting graduated high school. Bottled at 58%. And let's see what we think about this tasty dram. Glen Keith, which is located in the town it's named for, Keith. I believe at one point was originally opened to supplement Strathisla, which is a tiny ancient distillery. They couldn't increase production there. It's a listed site. I mean, you can barely move around inside the distillery. Like, it's almost unsafe to take tourists through it. It's so tight and so small.
Oh,
But
even
pictures,
the cobblestones out front are unsafe because they're so worn and unkempt. It's you're likely to sprain an ankle.
I that may be true. I don't remember that, but we were like, I think we went there just to crash the visitor center one day, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah, I think I like, we didn't want a tour. Um, I think I literally just wanted to see if they had any Chivas bottlings of Glen Keith at like
Mhm.
cask strength that, or Strathisla, or like the Chivas visitor centers used to have some pretty crazy bottlings as part of I've got a few in my cellar, but I don't remember what the range was called, but it was like a distillery only bottling, and there was even like some cool Caperdonics, Glenallachie. Like, I got an old Glenallachie at one point too. Aberlour. Doug's got one there handy. There you go. The distillery was reserve collection. There you go. Very fancy. He's got the Caperdonic. So those are probably some of the coolest whiskeys you could get from a Chivas distillery, and that's why it was always kind of fun just to go to the visitor center to see if they had any of those bottlings kicking around. But what do we think of this 96 Glen Keith? It's quite fruity on the nose. It's sherried, but like, there's a nice balance to it. It's not over the top. Um,
Yeah, I was gonna say it like nose wise, like I think it's got a lot of the characteristics that you tend to enjoy about Glenkeith, where it's still full
yeah.
on orchard fruits. The sherry's there, but it's not overpowering any of that, which is really nice.
Well, orchard, and I would even say like going tropical.
Hmm.
I think is what I tend to like about a lot of these Glen Keiths. They all tend to be in their mid to late 20s. Like, we rarely see like young IBs of Glen Keith kicking around. Partly because the distillery was closed for about 12 to 15 years. When I started, there was a Glen Keith 12-year-old that you could buy in a
Hmm.
weird, like, it looked like I think Don Julio copied the bottle for their tequila, like this really, really short, stout bottle. But Signatory, I think, has been one of the primary places we've been getting these lovely old tropical, little bit waxy bottlings
Hmm.
of Glen Keith. This one is sherried. it does make me wonder because almost everything in the Symington's Choice collection is sherry cask. Did they finish this in order to put it into that range? But if they did, I think they did a very good job of it.
Yeah. Yeah, even on the palate, I like how the sherry is just there and it's part of it. It doesn't just completely overtake everything.
Mhm. Harmony.
I found it to be, and I mean, maybe it's just my day, but I found it a little bit more earthy and funky, and it still had those berry notes and leaning into tropical. I just found it just slightly more like damp, damp warehouse of sherry in the air. And yeah, I still really love it.
Mhm.
I just didn't immediately pick up on that tropical note like you guys dialed in on. I really liked Sammy's note about that dark chocolate hint of cola, like that struck home. Kind of that
Nice.
sugary note.
Doug's saying you didn't notice his notes as well.
His notes came out after.
Oh, anyway, um,
Yeah. Way to copy, Doug.
Evan, I think you'd be fascinated by this fact. Sam Bronfman opened Glen Keith Distillery.
Yeah, that's right.
Years-
I remember reading about that
I
at
mean,
some
Evan,
point.
if you read the last Malt Messenger, we had a big thing on or two ago maybe on Seagrams, and obviously Sam Bronfman played a big part in that.
Yeah, that was TLDR. It was way too long. I didn't read it. But yeah, good things on Canadian whiskey, I guess.
My mom read it. And the reason I know this is my mom read it and wrote Evan a note about how good it was and how
Yep.
much she enjoyed it.
Yeah, she was very kind to me.
She never writes me to say well done. So
Well, Evan's her favorite son. She can't help it.
That's right.
well, I think it's
That's right.
probably just
Maybe
she's like she expects that I do, and like I'll hear about it if I don't. I think is kind of the
yeah.
her mothering technique.
Well, maybe for your 10-year anniversary of owning the store, I'll frame that email and we can put it up in your office.
Yeah, I mean it's vicarious praise. So
That's right.
yeah. Anyway, interesting distillery, fairly large, 6 million liters. And it was closed 99 and then reconstructed in the 2010s and started production again in 2013 just to have 10-year-old whiskey when the industry turns. Timing. Timing's everything, as they say. But any other thoughts on this, guys?
It has this really neat like along with the fruity notes, the sherry combination with the fruit on the palate goes into this almost like a rich marmalade, even texture wise, for me. It's a pretty cool dram.
Oh.
Mhm. Uh, I think Doug Four said it earlier, but it's been a while since we started off a tasting with a banger like this, like just right off the top.
That actually, I believe,
Yeah.
might have been Jeff on that one.
It's
I
the
don't know who
artist
that is.
previously known as Jeff. Yeah.
Oh, people have renamed themselves Numbered Dougs. That's really confusing. I'm not going to be able to keep track of that. So
I'm reading
Yeah,
a book right
it's
now, and all of the ship's mates that are not main characters are named Doug. And the book is told in a narrative where he is a multi-universe traveler, and he said Doug is a name that exists on all planets in every language, though it's spelt differently. Doug is universal.
there,
I
well,
think they're going for the gourd of Canada, where it's like, do you know gourd? And it's like gourd from Calgary or gourd from Surrey? Which one?
I think popular culture has been less kind to the name Keith. It's fair to say.
Yeah, well, I like our Doug conversation
Mm.
in the chat right now. It's very
Anyway,
enjoyable. As is
it is
the
interesting because the Companions of the Quake Calgary chapter has like had 6 Dans over its illustrious history, and I kept track of them by number.
This
And some of them weren't happy about how low down their number was. But I mean, it was there's nothing judgmental about it. It's purely just a numbering system. Anyway, shall we move on to Auchentoshan, as some people call it?
I prefer Auchentoshan.
Great.
Auchentoshan? Yeah. Oh man, there's been some incredible mispronunciations. you cannot make up how poorly people mispronounce the name of this distillery. Nevertheless, Wee Distillery, from the outskirts of Glasgow in what is technically the Clydebank area, founded 1823. I believe the distillery's name translates into in the corner of the field, which is interesting because it's been surrounded by urban sprawl for probably a century now. But triple distilled, the only full-time triple distilled whiskey in Scotland, I believe. There are other triple distilled spirits. Benromic is triple distilled. Benriach's triple distilled. Obviously, Hazelburn at Springbank is triple distilled. But Auchentoshan remains, I believe, the only full-time triple distilled whiskey in Scotland. And if that has changed, I would be interested to know, but I don't believe it has.
And
Lots of Doug comments, although now we're on to numbered Jeffs, which is interesting. So many comments about things just other than whiskey that there's just not enough.
This smells like kind of effervescent and also like bubbling sugar candy.
yeah, sugar candy, big time. It totally reminds me of some recent like 18 and 20-year-old Auchentoshan's we've had from the society that have been in ex-bourbon. It
Yeah.
still has that cotton candy and Twizzlers note that I get on those.
I don't know. I'm feeling a little bit more winter, like maple syrup in the snow on a stick kind of
Nice.
thing. Leaning
Yeah,
that
I
way.
could be convinced of that. Yeah,
There's
I would go like a brown sugar note, but yeah,
Mhm.
that works too.
It's not quite
you're not the
maple.
only one who did the brown sugar. Tom Rand said bananas Foster, lots of brown sugar
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
It does smell a lot like brown sugar. Like it smells like when you're making cookies and you're beating the butter, the
Yeah.
sugar, the egg together. That
Mhm.
element where you're like, I think we should stop here and just eat the mixture as it is. There's nothing further needed.
Yeah.
But you don't because you're grown up. You just lick the,
Yeah.
the
Uh,
spoon.
yeah.
Well,
It's beautiful.
that's further into the raw food movement than I've gone, but
Mm.
I can understand it.
I suppose I should put this up on screen. Um, Man, that's got like a really interesting like cotton candy / cinnamon hearts note to it on the palate.
Mhm.
It's got an interesting nose and palate to me. Doug making I would think it's fair to say a backhanded compliment about the distillery in the chat about it being one of the top 150 distilleries in Scotland. It has its moments for me. I think a lot of them tend to be older ex-bourbon barrels. I think
Yeah.
Auchentoshan does well. I think one of the things that's interesting about the distillate is because it's triple distilled, because they're getting to, I believe, the high 70s for their like middle cut, whereas most distilleries are going to cut like I think like 73 or under. You get a lot more volatiles in it. You're also losing character. And I think the challenge is uh, what happens next? Like, are they putting that high proof distillate right into wood or are they diluting it down? Now, the industry standard is you would dilute down to 63.5%. But I think even when you do that, you've got this really volatile spirit that is going to need more time for some of those sharper, rougher edges to burn off than those other distillates that are collected at like a much lower level. And I think that's the challenge with it. I mean, other triple distilled whiskeys like Bushmills, I mean, maybe it's because most of them are bottled at 40, but I don't really get excited about Bushmills until it's in its teens or 20s. Like, but in that case too, I think it can be really lovely. It's a weird, and I think with this is a weird spirit. I've never loved Auchentoshan and sherry.
I
You know
don't
what
mind
this?
this one. Sorry, go ahead, Harmony.
No, sorry, Evan. It even texturally and just on the nose, it reminds me of those Coca-Cola fizzy pop
Yeah.
candies with the
Yeah.
like the white top on them, the Coke bottom. And it's just the way that it hits my palate. I don't know why, but it feels almost effervescent in its notes.
Yeah, and the palate almost goes savory. Like it totally reminded me of the name of an Auchentoshan SMWS bottle from I think it would have been 3 or 4 years ago, so I don't remember the exact palette, but it was called Triple Distilled Bloody Mary. And it has that sort of like rich savoriness to it.
Well,
On the
there's an
palate.
acidity. It's like that,
Yeah.
you know, when you get like that kind of tomato based, like tomato paste acidity. It's interesting, and it's not because it's Auchentoshan. I think that it's wacky. Like, do I think this is a fun whiskey? Yes, but do I think it's an elegant whiskey? No.
Mhm.
It's very spicy on the nose, very decadent. I personally would have much rather seen like a 23, 24-year-old first fill bourbon barrel of Auchentoshan at this age.
I think the nose still shows its Auchentoshan-ness, if we can call it that, but the palate, the sherry takes over.
Palate's very candied. It's a little hot. There's no flaws in it. Like, I don't think it's bad in any stretch. It's not really my jam. There's something bourbon-esque about it. Kind of the fruits and the spices remind me of bourbon. Not
It's the
those chocolate tones, not the sherry, but
So if there's like a bourbon on this side and sherry on this side, the sherry went all the way around to bourbon,
well,
is
but I
what you're
mean,
saying?
was this a finish? Like, was this something that they put into sherry cask for a finishing period?
Yeah, that could
Um,
be.
I don't know that we know. I'm not sure that it says, what does it say on the bottle? I'm going to zoom in on the label. Filled 99 bottled. It says first fill Oloroso sherry, but I don't know. Maybe it's full term maturation sherry. There's something a little off about this. Doug says we should be protesting the bourbon tasting notes. Yeah, I don't know. On the palate, it reminds me of like some of those older Michter's ballings. Sorry to dwell on this, but
Mhm.
anyway, have we said all there is to say about the Auchentoshan
I think so, at least for this round.
for this round? Okay. Final comments to be reserved for later. Oh, foolishly, I closed the window, so I'll have to pull the next one up. So the next one we're on to is Glenlivet. Fair to say we don't see a lot of independently bottled Glenlivet, let alone Glenlivet this age.
Is this
Um,
Yeah,
sold
unless it's
out?
Gina.
No, there's low stock, which means there are either 1 or 2 bottles of this still available.
Okie dokie.
So fire that in the chat, put it up on screen. So what have we here? We have a first fill Oloroso sherry, but 25 years old, 53.1%, and it is still available. 25 years of age from the vintage of 1998. So this was an interesting one when we were getting started. This has a shall I say very vinegar forward profile to it on the nose. Like
The vinegar for me has kind of blown off a bit. I think acetone you mentioned before we started too.
it was acetone and nail polish to
Yeah.
start out with,
Yeah.
and now all I can think of is like old vinegar, like an
Yeah.
old yellowed like container of vinegar.
Chris and Sarah say onion soup. I can kind of see that. There's if you've ever had the potato chips that are made with Maui onion, or they use Maui onions for flavoring, where it's a little bit sweeter. It's got a bit of that, but it's also like you started with too much honey and you decided there was too much honey, so you cut it with marzipan.
If this was the onion soup that I was put in front of me, I would probably find a way to excuse myself. It's like it's stinky. It's like it's a little farty as well.
Mhm. Yeah, there's lots of like dried apricots in there on the fruit side of things.
Am I wrong? But that seems sulfured. It's like hella sulfured.
It's really awful, actually.
It's like so much salted, like it's like this is that German fetish salted licorice.
I thought you were gonna say fart.
But I mean,
That's a different fetish.
That's a different German fetish, but another popular one, I believe. So, yeah, maybe there's people that really dig this. I don't like this much.
I can see the issues with it. Honestly, for me, and maybe I don't get sulfur as well as others, but this isn't too far off a lot of official bottlings of Tamdu, stylistically. There's so much honey on it to it.
Yeah. It, I mean, I don't think this is the sort of thing that like ruins your palate for the night, but it's pretty rough. Like it's like there was like a you're in junior high and there was an accident in like the crafts shop where people were making leather things and just everyone is like inhaling dry leather. Like it's just not pleasant to me. There's nothing
Yeah.
really
A
fun
little bit
about
of
this.
epoxy in the craft shop too.
Oh yeah.
Um, Maybe we'll have to gargle with that Laphroaig just to get back to zero here.
Wishing I had a beer in front of me, but I'm trying to be more responsible.
I know I wouldn't, I don't know. Can we like, does anyone have anything positive they'd like to share? The chats just haven't been focused on tasting notes or in other places, but I would be curious to know if other people are in crazy
Like
bag there with
it's
Evan.
getting less bad as my palate becomes accustomed to its less attractive features.
My nose is
So it's
cooked. It
a
initially
Stockholm
hit
syndrome
me.
dram.
Yeah.
It hit me with like ketchup chip nose. Like,
Hmm.
and I hate that. You know how I feel.
Well, I don't slander a great Canadian tradition such as ketchup chips.
Oh man, but it just is. It got my nose. Just might have to take a break. Smell
Like
my
ketchup
juice.
chips
Well, Igor
dipped
likes
in
it, so
Thousand
that's
Island
good. I
island
mean,
dressing.
you know, there are people, we used to say back in the day, we had a customer, well, we still have a customer, we don't see him as often, but would come to all the tastings that if this would be what we called a Wojtek dram. Wojtek would like this whiskey. Doug's saying not anymore. So there was a time when Wojtek loved this kind of dram, but anyway, not my jam. We'll see if it improves over time. Um, and surprisingly, I mean, I would say Glenlivet was not the whiskey I would have had as the most likely to be weird in tonight's tasting. Fun little segue here. I think it's fair to say that Ben Nevis could have been expected to be the weirdest one in tonight's tasting because even though there's some gorgeous, gorgeous Ben Nevis or Ben Nevi, as the plural is known out there, um, it can be pretty weird. Although to be fair, we also have Glenrothes coming up as well, and Glenrothes also has a potential to get quite weird. And if we were doing this tasting blind, I would have actually guessed that Glenlivet was a Glenrothes because I've had more Glenrothes that drink like that Glenlivet than almost any other distillery, and by which I mean like Salford. Um, shall we on to the Ben Nevis? So
Yeah.
Evan and Igor like the Glenlivet, possibly others. Um,
I wouldn't say I like it as much as I was trying to play devil's advocate.
well, Evan, you also, and I'll give you credit for this, you have a much more adventurous and forgiving approach to whiskey than I do. So
Mhm.
I suppose I'm more jaded and stuck in my ways. So Ben Nevis. This one is gone. 1991 vintage Ben Nevis, 32 years old. First fill Oloroso sherry butt, 54.9%. But we don't know much more about that, about it than that. This one is sadly gone. Um, Interesting, some nice kind of like sort of figs and honey, soft nutty tones coming from it. It does have a little of that funky, that cheesy funk. Getting kind of like a bread and butter pudding note as well.
Yeah, there's a starchiness to it.
It's to me, it smells like you put all your delicious fruit inside like a dirty old sack
Mm.
and you're carrying it around. The palate is great. Uh, the nose is a little funky.
Something that reminds me of like that, like a butter tart kind of filling sort of texture, but also the sweetness of it, kind of buttery as well.
Yeah, a little bit root beer-esque.
That palate's awesome. Fruity, sweet, more of those like butter tart tones to it. Starting to go tropical, some nice syrupy, fruity tones, nutty. Uh, I love that the sherry in this is pretty balanced too, because it's letting some of that distillate come through. Yeah, this is like one of those gooey Ben Nevi. Um,
Yeah, it's almost going into, I remember our 96, I think it was 96 SMOS Ben Nevis, almost having like this duality to it where it started on the big sherry notes
mhm,
and then like halfway through on the palate, it'd start going tropical and have
mhm.
some good acidity to it. This is still more on the sherry side and very starchy again on the palate for me, but it does have wisps of those tropical notes in behind that.
Yeah. Doug dropping some interesting Ben Nevis facts because did the distillery actually move, or is it just the estate changed or something and they had to change the name? Yeah. No. Doug, you might as well tell us a tale, Douglas.
All right, sorry to jump in. Usually I like just giving emojis, throwing emojis around with this, but a couple years ago, the estate of which Ben Nevis sits on, most distilleries are the land is owned. Ben Nevis actually has a long-term lease. The estate was sold a couple of years ago. The biggest part of that was around a smelter that was on there, some hydroelectricity. There was rumors about 7 or 8 years ago that it might be kicked off the land. But I think Nika ultimately made the decision that anything sold post 2021 would ultimately be renamed into Glen Nevis instead of Ben Nevis. It remains to be seen whether they'll be kicked off. I mean, certainly it's some pretty prime land if you've been to the area, but it remains to be seen. So we'll see.
I
Yet
think it's fair to say in this day and age of American steel and aluminum tariffs, the thought that they'll get kicked off there to put a smelter in place is probably less likely now than it was even then.
a smelter is already there, number one.
Oh,
Second of all, it's a very inefficient smelter, so it might be
oh.
shut down. And third of all, it's aluminium, you monster.
Aluminium. Well, I'm sorry
Yes.
to not get my periodic table of elements clear enough there. Um, Interesting fact. I mean, what to Doug's point about the land, Scotland has some very bizarre rules as far as land ownership compared to Canada. Like you can own your building, but not the land it sits on. And historically, this presented challenges. Like if you wanted to stop paying the landowner for the land that your building was on, you could do this, but it meant you had to take out all the windows and remove the roof. And if you
Hmm.
did that, you no longer owed taxes to the landlord, but you still somehow owned the building. I mean, it's Scotland. What can we say? There's some interesting rules. Uh, I don't know. I think this Ben Nevis is probably for me the highlight of the first four.
Yeah, it might kick out that Glen Keith. Glen
But
Keith does
split
nose like
second
a
of you were
really
going to say
good.
Glenlivet.
Yeah. Uh, no, not this time. But the Glen Keith is nosing like a really good cinnamon bun right now.
Mhm. The cinnamon bun's a good note to it, but nice fruit tones. It's a little bit decadent, little bit gooey, like the cinnamon bun, but a nice balance to it. So the next one we're on to is Glenrothes. Part of the Edrington Group, formerly represented by Berry Brothers and Rudd, but not for a number of years now. And I mentioned before that Glenrothes for me has the notoriety of being the most on average sulfured whiskey consistently that I've ever had. So I typically get worried whenever I see Glenrothes and sherry because you never really know what you're going to get. Not sure if I put the Ben Nevis in the chat there. It looks like I did. So here we go. I'll put the Glenrothes in and we will continue on. Fair to say this is the darkest whiskey in tonight's lineup.
I don't think
1997 vintage, 52.4%, 26 years old. First fill Oloroso sherry, but haven't seen any reviews on this guy. So what do we think?
Okay. So
Nose is clean so far.
maybe. So there's has anybody here been to a Bianca Moore's liquidation center? There's one
Evan, hold on. You need to back up, I think, a couple of layers here before.
no, that's
What the
I'm working
fuck
my way
is-
to it.
What the hell? Sorry, what is a Bianca Amores, let alone a Bianca Amores liquidation center?
So it is, I don't know where it started, but this here, I'll share my screen. But there is one down in Quarry Park near me that I've been to, and I swear this is what the Bianca Moore's smells like when you go in. It's this weird combination of like off-gassing like rubber mats and vinyl and like shower curtains and like all this like weirdness.
All right. So I'm getting you smell some plastic notes to it. Is that where we're going
For
on this?
sure.
A little bit of plastic. Okay. I mean, as far as off-gassing goes, I would say it's not an unpleasant level of plastic off-gassing
Mhm.
compared to some other things I've had. I mean, we're not in like Loch Lomond flavor extension territory here, so it's a like a pretty dumpy nose in the sense that like you can tell it's sherried, you can tell it's a little fruity, but there's not really like anything leaping out. It's pretty one-dimensional. I had to go to the palate. Like, to be honest, I find that nose very shy, very hard to pull much out of.
It tastes like a Bianca Moore's too.
I was gonna say, to me it tastes like an old cigar shop. Like there's some sort of
Yeah.
cedar notes, some tobacco, there's some nice like really fancy tobacco in there too. So you got like some fruity or spicier notes as well. But it just tastes like thickly layered on like that. I think that's partly why I have a suspicion that some of the whiskeys in this range are finished. Like
Yeah.
Doug's
It's not even
suggesting through his facial reaction that they all are.
yeah, that there's some people saying baseball glove leather and stuff like that. It's palate wise, it's almost like chewing on a new like leather Converse shoe, like rubber and leather and all.
It is very leathery, very earthy. Like chocolatey, nutty. It's not bad. I think this would be a decent cigar dram, but do you want to pay $620 for a cigar dram? Like, I think there's a lot of other things. I mean, no disrespect for people who love cigars, but I mean, whenever you're smoking a cigar, you're going to lose some of what you're drinking. Like your palate is going to get desensitized to it. So I'm probably not going to pull out a heavy hitter, like one of my favorite bottles for that. But yeah, I think this for me answers a lot of questions about this range. And some of these whiskeys are banging, but this has clearly got to be a finish. Like this is not this doesn't come across as full-term maturation sherry.
So I don't know, everything's reminding me of SMWS bottles tonight. This totally
I
reminds
didn't
me
want
of,
to say that, Evan, so I'm glad you did.
okay. So which bottle does it remind you of, or does it remind you of a specific style?
Well, this just reminds me of like a lot of the kind of late teens, kind of goopy, over the top sherry finished society bottles that have been out there. So the one that comes to mind, although I don't think palate wise it's a perfect comparison, is that like 18 dots, is it 18.60 or something like that? The one for Canada. Do you know the one I'm
Oh, the
talking
Inchgour. Yeah, supping sherry,
about?
or yeah, supping sherry from, or sipping sherry from polished wooden cups or something like that.
Yeah.
Uh, weirdly, the one that it reminds me of is way younger, and it's from ex-bourbon. It reminds me of a couple drowns we've had from Nantu Distillery in Taiwan. Their peated stuff. It goes into this hyper leathery style. This is one of them, which is called Alice Through the Tasting Glass. That is just like leather everywhere.
And yet it's
And has a
bourbon.
lot of the notes. Yeah. Because it's peated. So it's got this like weird leathery smokiness that comes in.
So, I mean, I don't know that anyone could pick out that that was Glenrothes. And Glenrothes does have a bit of a style.
It's usually dumpier.
Yeah, but it's also got this kind of like kind of herbal, floral,
Mhm.
orange note. I don't think you could pick that up in this. Which is not to say I think it's bad. It's just not really not great. I mean, I would gladly take this over the Glenlivet, but um, I suppose every
That the syrupiness of it does go into like a really syrupy and thick bitter Amaro,
yeah,
territory wise.
yeah. All right. Let's see if we go to happier places when we saddle into the Bowmore. It's Bowmore next, right?
Yep.
Which is that even? I don't even. I might have to. Oh no, it is here. Uh, 2000 vintage Bowmore ex bourbon barrel. So there you go, straight ex bourbon. What could possibly go wrong here? 52.2%, 24 years. I will put that in the chat and put it up on the screen. I have high hopes for this one. I'm not going to lie. I really don't want to be
But
disappointed.
maybe Andrew Symington started this in like a sulfury sherry cask and then transferred it to ex-bourbon.
I don't know. It doesn't have any of that. It's just, and I mean, it says bourbon barrel, but we don't, there's no specification on first fill or second fill. I mean, it's got a fair bit of color. Granted, that is not the world's best photo.
Yeah, I think I took this one in
That's,
Sean's defense.
I was gonna say like we might have even borrowed that one. So we do try to take our own photos when possible. I mean, when you sit with this for a little bit, it starts to settle down to some of those nice tangy fruit tones that you get from Bowmore, like a lot of like apricots, orange, going into more tropical notes. The
It's
smoke is really
so
clean and fine.
it's so crackery, like on the nose too. Like
You mean
not
like,
even like buttery Ritz crackers, but into just like your typical like Nabisco, your crunching crackers onto the Ichiban soup
I mean, for
notes.
me, I was gonna say more like slightly stale icing sugar.
Yeah,
It's got
yeah,
a
that makes
sweetness
sense.
to it. It's a little buttery. Um, I can see that. Maybe like what are those white crackers? Saltines? Like
Yeah, saltines is
maybe a
was
little bit of
the word I
saltines,
was looking for.
but it keeps getting like there's honey tones coming out now. Oh man, nice clean smoke. Oh man, that's gorgeous on the palate. It's all about like really nice, soft, subtle fruits, Five Alive, orange, apricots, like grilled pineapple, starting to go into like kiwi and mango, like some nice exotic tones.
Yeah, that's good Bowmore.
Oh man.
Thank you. I've been waiting since the first whiskey for it to get good again. This is much
Yeah.
better.
You know, I played up that Glenlivet, but I do truly like the last one we had there, the Ben Nevis. I thought was really neat.
Mm.
But this is kind of more going into, I don't know, this isn't insulting, but like bog standard Bowmore territory for this age.
I mean, if by bog standard you mean 20 something ex-bourbon Bowmore, then yeah, that's
Yeah,
that's
that's
a fair comment.
kind of a dime a dozen nowadays.
Yeah. It's a dime a dozen, but I mean, how often do we get to see this? I mean, the distillery with their
Yep.
core shit is so focused on giving you sherried expressions, so much so that they took their already sherried expressions and they like sherry upped them. Like,
Yep.
yeah. Sadly, this is one of those ones that's gone. However, I think it's fair to say, and I mean, unfortunately, we're not in a position where we can put these two side by side, although I could potentially see what I've got here and see if I could put another Bowmore that we happen to have next to this. But if you're sorry to have not bought a bottle of this, the good news for you is you can still get our berries Bowmore from
Mhm.
97, if I'm not mistaken. Just trying to pull that up here on the screen.
Yeah, and that the berries is a little bit creamier, but also a little bit more coastal, from what I recall.
But it's also better price. I mean,
Yep.
so if you're and older, like this is we're comparing what was that? It was a 24-year-old Bowmore to an older one, 26-year-old Bowmore, for less money. I think that's a pretty good deal. Yeah, 850 versus what is it here? 735. Just gonna throw that into the chat for those who haven't seen it. I suppose I could put it up on the screen for a second. I mean, this is in that vein, except for it was a refill sherry, but the sherry's not really the big piece on this. It's again that nice, like really fruity, clean smoke, maritime profile. If you like this, you would love the berries Bowmore, I guess is the point that I have. They're different, but they're similar enough that if you really like the style, which I do, like I absolutely adore this, you would like that Bowmore as well.
Jeff says, I feel like blind you could peg this as a Bowmore despite it not being the most Bowmore-y Bowmore. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. Like, and that Jeff's comment is a fair one. Like, I think it's not the most Bowmore because it's not what we remember from the 90s and the 80s. But it still has that nice, like creamy coastal, really exotic fruit driven profile that even some younger bourbon cask Bowmores will show. Um, so yeah, it's lovely distillate. I really like that.
Yeah, there's no other distillery that really goes from like floral to tropical in the same way as Bowmore does.
The only thing that's going
That
to
I
be
can think
interesting
of.
is to see what Kilchoman in refill bourbon tastes like at 25 years,
Yeah.
because I think there could be a bit of a contender there because Kilchoman in bourbon tends to have like a lot of citrus fruit, and then it starts to fade into melons as it gets to like closer to 10, and then it could start getting really tropical
Mhm.
with a bit of time. Um, so I mean, I'd be interested to see that. I don't think I'm to suggest they're the same, but 100% Isla Bowmore ex bourbon, or sorry, yeah, 100% Isla
Gilholman.
ex bourbon Kilchoman at 20 to 25 years. That's going to be interesting to see.
Totally.
Mm. Harmony, are you satisfied? Any other comments before we go on? No, we're going to move on. All right, to Laphroaig. Which fun factoid, not currently in production. They had a little bit of an explosion recently. Actually here, we got to switch screens. So going to Laphroaig, and remarkably, we have one of these around. Yeah, Laphroaig had a boiler explosion recently and is out of commission until possibly the end of the year. This is a 98 Bowmore ex-bourbon barrel, 54.9%. Once again, kind of excited to have a nice, clean, naked Laphroaig here, in the sense that we're not layering on sherry. What do we think?
Mhm.
You know, in
It
some
has a
ways,
little bit of, sorry, go ahead.
no, you go first.
Yeah, it does have a little bit of, to me, Laphroaig, kind of like Bowmore does get a little bit of a lavender note as it gets older. And there's a bit of that there here, but it's kind of blended with marzipan and almond paste on the nose for me.
I was gonna say I think, I don't know, maybe at this age, these whiskeys should have been like earlier on in the lineup, because I think, like, I'm having a hard time getting a lot on the nose, and I think part of that is because we've had 5 sherried whiskeys leading into these 2 bourbon,
Yeah.
like peated ones, and the peat is fairly mild by this point. So, although Laphroaig at 25 can still have a bit of a bite to it. Like, I've had really mellow, gentle Laphroaigs at this age, but I've also had like really, really firm ones. So interesting that it's quite soft and approachable. Doug's saying very floral. I think the fruit tones, honey, are starting to come out with a little bit of patience. It's got this like gentle tarry tone as well. Like the peat's in this kind of oily tarry phase. It's not that really firm medicinal profile on the nose.
It reminds me of some of the recent Laphroaig 25 official bottlings, if you blended in a little bit of the Portiskeag 28s. The Portiskeag 28s get a bit of that floral note, whereas the 25s stay more tropical.
This reminds me more of that Port Ascog 28. It's very ashy, very creamy, more of that like really, really like kind of buttercream icing sugar on the palate. It's malty. Like, I love how, and I mean, this isn't surprising to me. Like, look, Laphroaig retains that malt profile so far into its age.
There's a little bit of, like, you tried to put out a campfire with a Febreze spray bottle.
With a what's a Febreze?
Yeah. Yeah, it's got a bit of a dryer sheet note and this like just this cleanness to the ozone about it.
I think that's going back to those floral tones, very floral. Harmony, what are your thoughts on this one?
Sorry, my dog is growling at the neighbors. But
Really deserved.
yeah, they're standing in the hallway and they're not petting her. So I like it. I actually like the soft smoke. I like the floral notes on it. It's very clean. It's not sherry, like beat down with sherry. It's very enjoyable. Yeah.
But go back and nose that Bowmore. I think this makes the nose of them, this to some ways, like, it's good, but it makes the Bowmore look even better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's more honeydew and cantaloupe coming out on the Bowmore with after the Laphroaig.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got great nose, great palate, I'm sure. Are we doing a speed round? Because I'm almost out of some of these and others I won't be drinking again.
Yeah, you'll just have to drink the bad ones.
The speed round will begin.
I just realized, like, I almost drank all this Bowmore. I'm like, if we have to go back, we're not gonna have anything left but an empty glass.
All right, fair. Okay, here we go. Speed round. Doug, did you want to join for this or not? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
I mean, I don't have very many opinions on these things, but I'll try.
You do. All right, you're in. You unmuted. That seems like consent. So, I'm just kidding. But you are welcome to if you want. If you don't want to, just mute yourself and we'll carry on.
Yeah. YouTube just pre-flagged us for this recording, by the way.
Well, interestingly, Evan, you saw that thing I sent you that they're going to start deleting our videos. Like
On
apparently,
Facebook, yeah.
yeah, apparently they don't want our content. So
Yeah.
Well,
It's,
OpenAI scraped them all, so.
yeah. Yeah, they don't need them anymore.
all right, back to that Glen Keith, our starting point dram. Still nice nose, very approachable, some light fruit tones, soft sherry, not over the top. Harmony.
Yes.
Okay, Evan.
Yeah, it's just a really well-made dram. It maybe doesn't like showcase the idiosyncrasy as a lot of the other drams in the lineup, but it's super well put together and probably the most easy drinking of them.
I don't know why, but it's what I imagine an English garden center is like. Like that's
Mhm.
just what the whole overall package is to me is for some
Like
reason.
just
Like-
proper.
Like, yeah, just a rural English garden center, lots of floral tones, probably some fresh fruits, and very rich loamy soil for some reason.
Yeah. And they let you walk around with a gin and tonic. It's so sophisticated.
Mhm.
Doug?
Okay. Yes.
It's fascinating where you go through so many of these others where I think it's easy to pick out some sort of flaw. And when you go back to the Glen Keith, I think for me at least, it's a lovely crushable dram that probably would be the hardest to pick out some of the big flaws that we might be able to find in others, for better or for worse.
And
Sure.
follow up, would it have been better if they just left it in its original cask?
I mean, I guess that in and of itself could be a dissertation, but I feel like again, Andrew's lineups are either old Islas or some big sherry influences. The other Andrew, easily in the top two Andrews that we're talking about tonight, with it. But this one seems to have been lovely, where hopefully the sherry was accentuating as opposed to covering anything up.
Very diplomatic,
The third Andrew is Auchentoshan, right?
which is a good segue.
We were having such a nice conversation. I don't know why you need it for me.
Up next.
I mean, this smells like the beautiful gardens at Auchentoshan Distillery that are located right off a motorway that you dangerously have to merge off of to visit the distillery, which is not an exaggeration. You have to go from 60 miles an hour to making a hard left turn without getting rear-ended on the other side of the road. So there's a little bit of like wet asphalt and like a bit of like fresh rubber on this too.
Yeah, I still get the like almost into candy canes now, but cotton candy and Twizzlers just all over the nose, which is Auchentoshan for me.
Cotton candy, cinnamon hearts. I mean, there's also kind of like this, I don't know, Mexican candy note where it's like you're not sure it would be legal in your own country, but like it still tastes pretty good.
Can smell that.
More on the palate. I mean, it's more of a, I don't know, it's just kind of like it's like fun, but funky, possibly not safe, but you know, it's not going to do you any immediate harm. More of an accumulation issue over time. Harmy, do you have any thoughts on the Auchentoshan?
I was gonna ask Doug, but his opinion's been made with the muting, I think.
Oh, I'm happy to go last. Please don't let me.
Yeah.
I struggle with it. It has a like this one and the next one. There's like a really high acidity to it on the finish. That it's just kind of overpowering.
There's a prescription for that, or you
Oh,
can just
good.
take Tums. Tums will probably do it as well.
Okay.
Are you saying that we need penicillin after any Auchentoshan that we're drinking, Andrew? I'm just unclear on your comment there.
No. It was Tums or whatever the hell the prescription version of Tums is. So acid
That's what I
reflux isn't good. as a PSA, if you have an acid reflux issue, talk to your doctor. There's solutions. You don't want to like get esophageal cancer. So, you know,
Good note.
Can also
Okay.
be cured by Bowmore.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, Doug, any comments on
I
Auchentoshan?
mean, it's you know, Jeff number one is right. This is lovely for an Auchentoshan, but triple distilled. I mean, like Old Cooley, like old Bushmills, like some of these can be beautiful, beautiful things. Um, I have had not amazing experiences both with Auchentoshan as a distillate and in my visits to the distillery, and so I feel like I'm probably slightly biased. However, um, wood often accentuates distillate. Again, remain steadfast in my comment that even though there's 151 distilleries in Scotland, Auchentoshan's easily in the top 150 for me.
Wow. Well, I mean, I I would put it in the top 145 because there's at least 5 distilleries that I would throw under the rug before Auchentoshan. But
Can we make that an entire tasting where you and I just debate
oh,
that issue, Andrew?
the
But
worst distilleries?
You know,
I-
since we're taking our time here, where does Authrusk fit in that?
Oh,
Is that the
Authrusk and
151?
Glenrothes are rather close to the bottom for me.
whoa. Where is Tullibardine in this discussion, first of all?
I don't. There were
It's
some
not there yet. It
gorgeous.
only started in 1964.
There were some gorgeous 70s and 80s bottlings, like vintage bottlings of Tullibardine.
No, there's some lovely 60s bottlings of Tullibardine. There's some decent bottlings of Authrusk in the 70s, early or 70s.
Are there though?
Yes. With it. Again,
Name
two are
three.
liberty at this point, and I'm going to reserve myself so that we can keep this under 2 hours for the tasting.
All right. Well, I would love to do a tasting of Scotland's worst distilleries.
The
That
we
could
can
be
call
fun.
it the whiskeys that Andrew and Doug don't want to try.
Well, we each get 4. So we get to confront each other with 4 whiskeys.
Oh my
We can
God,
totally
can
make
that
that
be the tasting? Can we
Yes.
we will pour for the 45 people watching, just like basic, enjoyable sipping whiskey.
No.
No,
Everyone's got to suffer
let me
with us.
finish. But then
suffer
I
together.
want to suffer with you. I want you two to blind each other with
Yeah.
4 whiskeys.
I just think this could be a total like meme tasting where it's like the top 8 whiskeys Andrew and Doug hate. Number 4 will surprise you.
Indeed. I
Right.
just wonder, are we in sort of like the early days of MMA where there's only no eye gouging, or are we in the later days where we have to put on like gloves and we're not allowed midsection shots and stuff like that?
Well,
That's my
Oh no.
question.
Either way, Joe Rogan won't attend, is what I've heard. So
Oh,
Yes.
I don't know. That makes it seem really dirty. Speaking of dirty, I'm already back on that Glenlivet. And I don't love it.
And I swear, maybe this is just my naivete, but I would nose this and guess Tamdu, stylistically.
Again, you're being too mean to Tamdu, I feel like.
I like Tamdu.
I
It's
mean, if I was guessing blind, I would have guessed this was either Glenrothes or Macduff.
So
Mhm.
can I ask the 3 of you? So is this a whiskey? Because Glenlivet's super interesting, right? Like in around 2007, they stopped selling to independent bottlers. Allegedly, they might be turning on the taps again here, and we might see some more hitting the independent bottler market. Signatory is one of the ones, along with Gordon MacPhail, that had more stock than just about anybody. Is this a whiskey that had a heavy sherry influence because it was trying to cover something up? Or did this come from the sherry cask that was finished or matured in?
my guess is he wasn't trying to cover something up. He was trying to make it interesting.
Well, and
No.
it's an interesting question. I mean, I think this got into the Signatory Symington's choice because it's 1998 Glenlivet. Like, how many other people are bottling Glenlivet? They put it into a
No
mead.
one, if this is what they're selling.
Yeah.
Like this
I
is
mean, it's not as dire now as it was when we went around the first time. Like, it is, time has been kind to it, but it's like, it's still pretty bad. Like, it's still not great.
Harmony could debate that. It looks like.
yeah, I like Glenlivet, and I can't find anything nice to say about this. This is not my jam. This isn't it.
It's
I don't mind it. I do.
If I
I agree
knew I
with
could
Andrew
never
actually.
drink scotch, if I could never drink a scotch again, and this was my last dram, I would turn it down.
Well, that got very dark very quickly, first of all.
Yeah.
Second of all, I feel like this actually improved as we went through. And certainly, this is my, seventh or eighth or ninth dram as we go through and revisit these. And certainly by the 15th or 20th of night, I might actually get to a point where I enjoy it. But I feel like
it
with
would
some time,
take 4 rounds before I was like, yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
indeed.
Yeah,
I will
it's-
gladly finish this off.
All right. Okay. Moving on to the Ben Nevis. Try to keep things rolling here. It's got a nice kind of like just old school like feel to it on the nose, in the sense that like this is whiskey made back in a time when I mean, maybe I'm selling this short, but a lot of the best whiskeys were well made because they were like made with less care, in the sense they weren't rushed. Like, they weren't like trying to time fermentations and churn things over for production reasons. Like, it smells like, I don't know, funky old school whiskey from the 90s.
Yeah, it does. It's super leathery still, but that's kind of toned down a bit on the nose. Right now it's like the Black Forest cake or like dark chocolate torte that you ordered for dessert wasn't decadent enough. So you had the server like dump a tiramisu on top.
Palate is gooey. It's starting to go a little tropical, very fruity, some nice spices. It's still funky. There's like a little bit of there's a little weirdness to this, but a lot of Ben Nevi have a weirdness to them. Doug, you look like you're ready to share some.
I've got again, I feel like I could go on for too long about this. A couple of notes. For those nerds that go into whiskey funds, who've just been going through a bunch of Ben Nevis through the decades and talking about how the distillate changes. But for me, this is such a lovely example of older Ben Nevis where for those that don't know, Ben Nevis use a combination of distillers and brewers yeast. And for me, this is a style of brewer's yeast where there's a tropical sort of oiliness that comes through that ultimately you can only really get from that and is fairly unique inside of Ben Nevis. And so it's not everybody's jam, but it's super unique in that regard. And for that, I'm truly grateful.
Yeah. Harmony? Did we lose Harmony? I'm just trying to check to see if they reviewed this one, and I don't think they did. On
No, I don't remember seeing it.
Yeah. Anyway, Harmony appears to be lost for words. So sort of nodding. Shall we move on to Glenrothes in 2 words?
Mhm. I'm surprised that it's similar in style to the Ben Nevis. Like there's a little bit more fruitiness to it, but it's almost like lost a lot of its fruitiness with time and sherry.
Ben, Phil and Suzanne, Phil or Suzanne, not a Ben Nevis fan, it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
I wish they put as much time into their tasting notes as they did into their t-shirt selections with one another. Because that's just hurtful. I feel like the Ben Nevis doesn't deserve that.
Maybe the Glenlivet. Yeah.
I only just, because I have to leave mine on speaker view so that we're not broadcasting people's faces eventually onto the Facebook. I only just saw the t-shirts. The t-shirts are great. So
They are amazing. Full marks for those.
I mean, this one has improved over time for me, but I still think it's kind of over sherried It's dumpy. It's kind of one-dimensional.
Well, I think you've got a bunch of distillates that have been hammered with sherry in these initial 5 drams. And the Glenrothes is probably one of the distillates that's had the hardest time, even though so much of the great Glenrothes that I've had has been sherry matured.
Fair point.
We currently have a lot of speakers out here and hammered with sherry as well. So
Speaking of which, Harmony, did you want to chime in on this one or not? You're muted.
It's
Oh.
it's okay. Heavily sherried whiskey is not my jam. Like, I mean, the Ben Nevis had like a little grapefruit, but it was very sherry. Like, I don't want to spend hundreds of dollars to drink sherry when I can buy it for 40. So I just struggle with that, because, as you know, all of my opinions are based around the dollar of the whiskey because I'm Scottish. So this is fine. I Yeah, it's a fine whiskey. It's not what I
Okay.
reach for, but I reach for the next dram.
So
I
why
would
don't you
reach
lead
for
us
that
off on the
happily.
Bowmore then, Harmony?
Oh, sure, I'll do something nice. I'm mixing them all together, Phil, just so you know. So I see what kind of terrible pains I can put myself through later.
yeah,
I actually think this little bit I have left is lovely. It's
it's
extremely fruit forward and a nice floral note. And
you should Harmony, you should create an infinity bottle where it's just like the dregs of everything you hated and just call it
oh my God,
why. Why?
I should have. I have too many bottles.
This is
I
this
wish.
is
I wish though.
this is not the most expressive Bowmore, but it's quite expressive. And I know this is a dark thought, but like if I wanted to like specify a scent for my memorial service, like if I
Mhm.
wanted the room to smell like something, it would be like this.
That's
Like
funny because
people would
I.
feel comforted by it, I think. Like it would be a comforting smell. And
Yeah.
That's
people be
funny.
like, you know what, Andrew liked that smell. And it makes me think of him.
I think it's funny you said that because I was thinking to myself this would make a nice air freshener and it also smells like dying candles, and that was my thought, dying candles, not a
Yeah.
burning out
And
candle.
like if there's a viewing, you don't want to like smell, the goods. So like having that scent, like it protects everybody as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The palate's still lovely. I mean, I
Beautiful.
still don't think this is as good as our berries cask, but it's pretty awesome. Like I love this style of bourbon cask Bowmore. We don't see enough of it.
So, couple of comments for me very quickly, if I can jump in. Um, I completely judge people based on what their favorite Isla distillery is. And Andrew, I know yours through and through is Bowmore. With it, which is interesting. I mean, we go through Angus from Whiskey Fun and Decadent Drinks. Also talks about Laphroaig. I know there was a couple comments about certainly Kilhoman. I think by Tom in his blending glasses. In the comments earlier, I am a huge Kahlua fan, and by extension, Laphroaig and Malt Mill, slightly less Ardmore, which was formerly a Isla distillery. But just a quick fun fact: allegedly, the word on the street rumor is that Laphroaig has recently had an incident as well at its distillery, and so might be having production shut down for the next little bit as well, which might take us into the next one. Before I finish my comment with, this feels like the most amazing incense, where there's just a slight tannic note, woodiness in the background, that if it was maybe bottled a couple years before, the fruitiness would be able to
Mhm.
show a little bit better versus some of the woodiness that's just starting to show through on it.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Interesting comments there, Doug. Went to some interesting places, followed by a comment on Laphroaig and the state of things. And
I agree completely on that woody note though, because that was the lasting impression of the dram, and I thought, how do you know what wood tastes like? Is it only based on smell, and what wood am I tasting slash smelling? And then how do you learn? Like, can you lick unfinished wood at like Home Depot and not get kicked out for science, for my job? Like, Andrew, help me out here. How do I
I mean,
experience these wood tastes?
if somebody's watching, maybe. I mean, I would generally say it's probably not a good idea to lick wood. Like you don't want to get a splinter in your tongue. And I would imagine a lot of the wood at Home Depot is quite splintery. So
It's unfinished, so
slash treated. A lot of it's probably treated.
yes.
Um,
I know. I know
Um,
the chats can go a lot of places with this, but seriously, Doug, it was a thought I had, like, because sometimes I just say like sandalwood or cedar because they're very popular woods, and like it was something I was curious about because
I
it
think
is
Harmony,
easy
what I'm
to
hearing
put that
is
cask note.
you would like to be able to taste multiple types of wood so that when you're talking about them in a tasting note, Doug's, but like, I mean this, I get this. I mean, we use these terms as tasting notes, but like, I've never put a hot cedar plank in my mouth.
I know, and then you're like, but they put salmon on it. It's like, how do you
They
know?
do. They do.
Yeah.
You have a sense, like you know what some things taste like. So
I guess
I hate
sometimes
to
I don't.
I hate to interrupt the two of you on what I find a very fascinating conversation.
about
However,
wood and mouth.
for those such as your legal representations, the continued conversation of mouths and woods, I might counsel you to move on to the next dram.
Laphroaig.
Well, we were purely trying to avoid Harmony getting splinters, Doug.
Yeah. Yeah.
This has grown. This has gotten better in my opinion on the nose. Still very malty. Some nice fruity tones. Um, Curiously, like it has sort of like an old cigarette kind of whiff to it on the nose too. Phil and Suzanne said they need a cigarette.
And they also have their hand up, of which I would, again, in the sense of giving counsel, that
Yeah,
is
we've asked them to unmute.
Yeah.
for it.
Is that
I think Phil's
wave or
trying to.
stop, please?
Yes, yes. Let's not allow them to unmute themselves at this point.
Okay. Who else wants to chime in? I mean, I like the Laphroaig. I I don't know that. Well, it's not my top two, that's for sure. Maybe not my top three. I'm not sure. Anyway,
So
Evan?
it's
Go ahead.
fascinating for me where there's, sorry to interrupt. It's fascinating to me where, we talk about individual sort of characteristics of distillate on the island, but how there's overlap on so many of these
For sure.
distilleries. Just before we hopped on, we were talking a little bit about sort of the southernmost three distilleries being Laphroaig, Lagavulin, and Ardbeg, and how there's been back and forth where, Lagavulin created a small distillery called Malt Mill to try and copy Laphroaig's distillate. For a while in the late 80s and early 90s, Ardbeg wasn't really producing, but the Laphroaig staff would go down the road during silent season to create sort of Laphroaig at Ardbeg. And for me, this is kind of an overlap with the two Suntory distilleries being Bowmore and Laphroaig, where if I were to taste the last two blind, I don't know if I would have guessed the two of them being exactly where they were, but I might have guessed that those two distilleries were in the mix.
Yeah. Okay. Evan?
Yeah, well, I really like the Laphroaig, partially because Bowmore's already taken. But Laphroaig tends to be more my style at this age than other Isla distilleries, and it's got this chalkiness that's really coming through with those floral notes that I really, really enjoy.
Harmony, you go, and then I want to comment on Jeff's pseudo Viking funerary arrangements, which are amazing and reminds me of that show. Is it The Northman, where like
Oh,
and the guy's trying to shoot the flaming arrow on the ship, and he keeps missing. Anyway, Harmony.
That just sounds like something that would happen in my life.
Yeah.
The Laphroaig is lovely. I think it's gotten better. Um, it has some nice notes. You know, what's interesting for me with Laphroaig is I don't often find like that I can identify the notes. Like it's not overly fruity in essence. Like I can't name it off the same way I can Bowmore, but it's got some nice oils, a nice balance of malts and nice soft beat, and it's lovely.
Like to Doug's point, like some of these, both the Bowmore and the Laphroaig would probably be hard to identify. I mean,
Yeah.
Laphroaig tends to have a much more medicinal profile, even when it's older,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
this doesn't have that. And
No.
Bowmore almost always, even like for things this age, it's very rare for us to not see Bowmores with a little bit of that lavender note, even if it's very faint. And so that's completely missing from this particular Bowmore.
Well, I don't necessarily think it is missing. I mean, maybe not specifically lavender, but I find it extremely floral
Well, the
and
floral,
oily
I mean, there's other elements of it that are
that I don't
Bowmore-esque,
find.
but it doesn't have, at least to my mind, it doesn't have that sweet lavender note that you often see, even if it's faint. It's just that to me, it's not there in this particular bottling. And maybe that's a sign of things to come. Maybe we're not going to see it in 2000s vintage Bowmore, possibly.
Mhm.
But
What I do like about this Laphroaig is it does have this, yes, Dave, this like sweet and ashy note that I think is part of their DNA to me. That makes it a little bit more notable.
Mhm.
I just so appreciate that as Harmony went to disagree with you, she gave you the teacher. I almost waited for her to pull her glasses down and say, Mr. Ferguson, you know, I humbly disagree with you, but um,
Never, I've never worked the glasses before. I guess I could try it in the future.
You'd have to, I mean, I'm staring at a screen right now. Most of the time when Harmony's trying to get my attention, I'm like turned the other way working on something. So she'd have to like really get my attention and then take the glasses off. And that might work.
Noted.
All right, Doug, only so that you can vote, I'm going to take your co-hosting thing away so that you have the ability to select your favorites. Unless you would rather tell us your favorites.
no, I didn't. I'm just glad I only found out now that I had co-hosting abilities because I would have manipulated those much more had I known beforehand. But
I have a question. Is
Yeah,
there a way
go.
to get the chat off of this thing? Like, I gotta read this later. I missed so much.
Yeah, I
I
can
think
send
we
it to you.
can download it, but we've never really
Yeah.
bothered because,
It's okay.
you know.
As long as I know I can find it,
Also,
I will
possibly
find it.
people don't want us to preserve a record of what they wrote in the chat. So out of respect for our
Yeah.
community, we allow them to have that chat and then let it vanish into thin air.
Yeah,
Okay,
what happens in the comments stays in the comments.
That's
I
right.
won't publish it under
Um,
my real name.
on that note, we're gonna launch the poll. Now, Evan, unfairly, I'm going to chastise you for the lack of cheeky third questions in recent polls, including tonight's. We often quite look forward to the cheeky third question that we're not quite sure.
What are
Um,
we paying him for if not for
I
three
know.
questions?
I just haven't had enough time at work to waste on this kind of thing. But I'll get back to it. I just need to refine my sense of humor.
all right. Speaking of which, Evan, I'm going to start with you. Do you have your top three for tonight's tasting?
Yes, top three will be the Laphroaig, just because I love Laphroaig and that's a really good one. Number two is going to be the Glen Keith, just because I think Doug nailed it. It's just the most flawless whiskey of the bunch in the lineup. And it just shows nicely, even though it doesn't, because it lacks flaws, it doesn't shout out as much as the other ones. And for maybe more flawed whiskey, this is a shocker because I don't like the distillery much, but I'm going to take the Glenrothes.
Amazing. Well, Evan, I do love that you have your own perspective, right or wrong. So amazing. Love those choices. Harmony, top three.
A little bit of an echo-ish here. The Glenlivet, I just loved. I thought we just started off with a banger.
You
Not fair to
mean the Glen
anything else.
Keith, right? Sorry
Sorry,
to
Glen
interrupt.
Keith. Yeah, the
Yeah.
Glenlivet
Oh,
sucked.
thank God.
I mean, was not my favorite. The Glen Keith, sorry, I really liked, and then the Laphroaig and the Bowmore for me. Yep.
I'm gonna differ slightly. I'm gonna go Bowmore, Laphroaig. And as much as that Glen Keith was fun, I'm gonna go Ben Nevis for number three.
Cool.
It's a little like, again, like, I mean, to be fair, like a lot of good Ben Nevis, it's a little weird, but like weird in a good way. And the Glen Keith was good, but I mean, I would have rather seen that in like a refill bourbon or refill sherry. I think it would have shown better. I think Glen Keith is just too delicate, for like active wood, um, which is, not a double entendre. I know there's been too many of those tonight, so get your heads out of the gutter. Um, let's see how the polls are doing. We're gonna give it another 30 seconds. If you haven't voted, you got 30 seconds to vote, and then we're calling it. Favorite whiskeys. Two of you have yet to vote, so you got 30 seconds, and we're gonna call it. Evan, any other comments tonight? Thoughts?
It it's a tough one because I think the 35th anniversary Signatory tasting was really, really good. It had 3 Boonhavens in from what I recall, so it's hard not to be. But as much as these aren't necessarily all drams that I'd want to run out and buy, it was a super interesting tasting.
Well, and I mean, the interesting thing is like talking about sister bottlings or sister casks. We did a tasting
Yep.
with that Edward Hour 25 recently, which is comparable in age, comparable in price to these. And I think for the sherried whiskeys, that Edward Hour 25 far surpassed all of these tonight in terms of
Cool.
its profile. So, and I know the reason I bring that up is someone asked me that question today. He's like, I know you're doing this tasting tonight. What do you think about that versus? And I have that answer now.
Mhm. Nice.
All right, the poll. Those remaining folks didn't vote, but I'll share the results here. So here we go. Top whiskey. This is an interesting one. Glen Keith tied with Laphroaig for number one. Ben Nevis number three, I suppose, and Bowmore number four. So that's round one. Round two. Look at that. Bowmore steals the show. Laphroaig coming in second, and Glen Keith, and a surprising showing by Auchentoshan, for tied for third. So some interesting results there tonight. Shockingly, the Glens got no votes.
I think the moral to the story on that, especially from an Isla perspective, is if you can't get a Laphroaig, Bowmore will do.
Well, I think the more important moral of the story is Ben Nevis should really reconsider this decision to change the prefix to Glen. I mean, that's a
Yes.
very troubling decision on their part. They're far better off leaving it as a Ben. But anyway, well, listen, guys, this was a fun lineup tonight. Got a little more stuck in the weeds than we thought we were going to. There was single, double, and even triple entendres out there, which we won't rehash, and the chat won't be repeated. But awesome lineup tonight. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Doug, thank you for being our fourth wheel. I guess if you're gonna have 3 wheels, you might as well have 4. So probably more stable. Harmony, Evan, thanks for this. Everybody, have a great night. Enjoy the tasting. For those of you we'll see tomorrow night for the Single Cask Nation, look forward to it. Anyways, good night, everybody.
Good night, Doug's.
Does mine do this too or not? Oh,
Yeah.
no. Yeah, he's got some AI thing
Oh,
involved, which I
cool.
don't have yet. So anyway,
Oh,
all
the
right.
fact that he was still there after makes it. Oh, I was gonna say less cool, but that's way cool.
Yeah, it's anyway. All right. Good night, everybody.